Happy Thursday, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fantasy Football Today, DFS. It's Thursday, which means we're 1 week away from NFL kickoff, and I am joined today by Sticks Picks, otherwise known as Nick Bretwish with Win Daily Sports. Nick has been on this show before, a friend of the show, a friend of mine. Nick, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing very well. 1 week away from kickoffs. Kind of burnt out from all the seasonal drafts and doing all the best balls. Luckily, I don't think I got burned by the Elijah Mitchell or AJ Dillon stuff. So usually I would get that gross. For some reason, I don't have any exposure this week or this year. I'm sorry, but I'm excited for the regular season. I'm excited for DFS. Love that we got a Thursday and Friday night football coming next week. I think that'll be a nice touch.
I'm actually glad you brought that up. Do you think, and I know like DraftKings is they peddled out the main slate a long time ago, but they're going to drop some other slates, I imagine, like the afternoon slate. Do you and they have a showdown slate for Thursday, I believe. Do you think they're going to put out a 2-game slate for Thursday and Friday?
I would think so. I feel like it's kind of going to be like that holiday time where you get these random weird slates. And I think a lot of people, like, Showdown has grown so much over the past couple of years, but I still think anybody would open up decent player or contest sizes for Thursday, Friday. I think it'll open up.
Yeah, I mean, because I really want to play the 2-game slate as opposed to the showdown. I will mention just a programming note, everybody. The regular FFT DFS team is going to be with you next Thursday at 11 o'clock, and that's going to be every Thursday at 11 o'clock. It's going to be me, Mike McClure, and Meg Shop doing the game-by-game breakdown. It'll be a pretty structured show where we go through our favorite plays in each game. We give out our cheat sheet, things of that nature. And for next Thursday, we'll touch on showdown and perhaps the 2-game slate, as well as Mike McClure is an absolute showdown specialist. But Sticks, on this show, I wanted to talk about a couple things because you've come onto this show before and you've mentioned your NFL DFS Bible, or your DFS Bible, if you will, that you have up at Win Daily. I wanted to touch on just a few things from that. Just spend like 10 minutes on that in terms of maybe some of the salient points, some of the main points that you think, NFL DFS players need to be reminded of going in with their bankroll going into this season. And then I wanted to talk about some week 1 stuff. I know you've already hand built. I know you both hand build and I think you use like the optimizer stuff or whatever, but you've hand built, I think, already like 120 lineups. And
118 as of this morning, which is kind of sickening. So we'll see what happens. I'm excited to talk about that player pool too, because a lot of it are the same guys with just a bunch of different 1 or 2 off. So it'll be a hit or miss week for me in week 1.
And that's how it is a lot. And when it comes to DFS, you either hit big or you miss big. But so we're going to spend most of the time, we're only going to go like 30, 40 minutes. We're going to spend most of the time talking about sort of your plays, but also your thought process, right? Because I think a lot of people, for those that don't know, Nick is an extremely successful long-term DFS player, both in NFL, but in the PGA streets as well. But like I always knew you from NFL DFS, and I kind of want to get into like the Nick Bretwish mind, because I think a lot of people don't use that contrarian mindset like you do, especially just your average everyday NFL DFS player. So I want to talk about some of the things that you are looking at already. So let's start with the NFL DFS Bible, though. Let's start with maybe 1 or 2 points that you think the new player or even the old player, because a lot of people, we create bad habits, right? They need to come into this season armed with a certain type of knowledge.
Sure. For me personally, it's something I'll always live by. And I know you, correct me if I'm wrong, Sia, are not much of a cash game player. I think that is something that has helped me a ton in kind of like staying disciplined. Is, let's say, for easy math, my bankroll for week 1 is going to be $100. Obviously set a bankroll for the season coming into it, right? Like, we all have families, jobs, other things going on, rent to pay, mortgage to pay. Like, be disciplined with what you're doing. Have a set amount of money that you're okay. Like, hey, this is for DFS. If we turn a return on this, that'd be great. If not, nothing changes in my life to where this is money that I'm desperately needing to have back, right? Because we do not want to play the desperate game. It's kind of gambling 101. DFS, a lot of the states don't consider it gambling. Like, I think between you and I see it, it certainly is some form of that. Like, obviously it's a game of skill, and you could do a lot of things. Research helps a ton. There's a lot of tools out there that help people be better DFS players, but obviously bankroll management 101, just make sure you know what you're going to invest this season. If you start making money like crazy and you want to push the envelope a little bit, by all means, because you had that money set aside to begin with. But for me, using about 50% of my weekly bankroll in DFS cash games, which are like 50-50s, double ups, whatever you want to call them, FanDuel, DraftKings, Yahoo, like they have different names for them. But single entry cash games has kind of been a staple for me. That's really what got me into the industry when Scott Engel first brought me on at Win Daily, was to solely write cash game stuff because they had a lot of, big hitters like you, Dave Jones, all those guys doing GPP stuff. I was like, like cash games are a little bit boring. It's put $5 in, you get $10 back, but you only need to beat 48% of the field. And that's, for people listening to this show, like you guys are probably all very advanced NFL minds. People are still going to play DFS that don't know a whole lot about the game, but people that listen to this show, listening to you and Mike, all the smart minds that come through CBS, you're probably already ahead of the game right there. But using 50% of my bankroll for cash games, and then, assuming I hit those 65 to 70% of the year is kind of my goal. And I try to map that out. Like, hey, if I'm not succeeding week 1, 2, and 3, I kind of go back to the drawing board. And then that other 50% for, GPP tournaments. I'm a big single entry guy. I know you are too. I will chase Millie makers sometimes just because, I had a good golf season. I'm going to, move some more money towards that. And obviously, like, we all want to win $1 million one day playing DFS. Like, it's a great story to tell. I don't go crazy with it. Week 1's $5. So sure, I do have 118 lineups hand built. That is just in the $5. So I'm not maxing out the $100 contest or anything like that people out there do. But I think in a nutshell, half of my bankroll going to cash games. We could talk about what those builds look like. I know you're well educated on that too. And then kind of how we build a GPP lineup. And then we'll get into this week 1 slate.
Yeah, let's talk about just real quick, touch on how to build cash games. And because generally speaking, we're going for, well, I mean, I wish there was another word for this. We're going for the chalk and cash games, and we can play some chalk in tournaments, but we're also trying to alter our roster construction, maybe have some contrarian plays in there. So are we just following the crowd with cash games largely?
I think in a little bit, yes. I think the way that I would really go after it is getting the highest floors, right? The safest players, guys that are going to get, if you're paying $8K for Tyreek Hill, you need them to go to 2.5 times their salary. And what I mean by that is, 20, 15, 16, 20 points. Like, you want guys that you can kind of just staple in. Tyreek's getting 10 targets, 80 yards, 7 catches. If he gets in the box, that's great. Also, I don't want to push anybody to signing up for anything like that, but there are so many content providers out there. I think ownership projections are a very, very big thing in modern day DFS. And that's what you mean by chalk. If you're just listening to the radio, you probably don't know who the chalk is unless there's a clear injury. Like last year when Nick Chubb went down, we know Jerome Ford's going to get 20 touches the next week. Everybody's going to play him in DFS because DraftKings or FanDuel, Yahoo, whoever hasn't updated his price for the workload that's about to come. So that, what I call a free square, you usually always want to play those guys in a cash game lineup, and then not stacking. So I know in tournaments, when I get through some of my tournament lineups here, if you don't puke or cut me off the show, not building lineups that tell a game theory of just 1 or 2 games and hoping they shoot out and just getting that back and forth nature. I'll talk about a team real quick, I guess, just for,
yeah, go ahead.
Like Dallas or Buffalo, right? They got the highest implied team total of the slate. I don't want to go Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, or Khalil Shakir, someone in that value, stack that whole offense, because if that game does not go as Vegas thinks it is, as the public thinks it is, shooting out with a total of 48.5, your cash game lineup is absolutely dead, right? You want to mix and match, get a lot of safer plays, so you're not reliant on 1 or 2 games shooting out, which is probably what you want to do on the GPP side of things, is really limit your exposure. Find a couple games that you think can just go back and forth with bad defenses and then really stack your points that way. But it's if Josh Allen, knock on wood, he's my seasonal quarterback, I think, that I have the most of. If he got hurt on the first play, and that's probably going to hurt Khalil Shakir, it's going to hurt Keon Coleman, Donkey. You don't want your whole lineup going down because you're stacking that offense, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. It's Scott to Wisconsin, Florida Project guy. We're going to have to come up with an acronym for that. He says, this guy is giving the best explanation regarding how to play DFS for someone new. I appreciate you saying that. I think it's really important because people come, listen, let's be real here. People come into any DFS slate, but particularly NFL DFS, because it's so popular, and they start scanning those big contests, and they might be responsible enough and have the wherewithal to be well, I'm not going to put in 2 lineups to the 150 max, but I'm going to play this single entry. Well, it turns out that single entry has 20,000 people in it. So that's okay to play that. Don't get me wrong. It's a single entry. Go for it. 3 max, whatever you want to do. But also that cash game side, people aren't allured by doubling up. But the problem with that perception of wanting to hit big every time is that when you're done with the slate at 7:45 and you miss on your tournaments, because that's going to happen a lot to the best tournament players,
Absolutely.
and you see no green whatsoever coming back. Again, you said it yourself. You're not even hitting the cash games at 100% rate, right? You're trying to hit 65-ish%, and that's giving you the sort of the continual return to maintain your bankroll, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, if my bankroll for week 1 was $100 and 50 of it goes to a single entry double up, if I hit that, it doesn't matter what my GPP lineup does. Like, I'm breaking even on the week, moving on to week 2. And if I do hit something on GPPs, great. Like, my bankroll just grew for the season, or, I could play a little bit more in cash games, or I could play $150 single entry next week because I hit a couple hundred in a GPP. Like, that is the way I would totally recommend anybody getting into this. Is just, you want to avoid hitting the deposit button, right? I know, DraftKings FanDuel, like, they hate anybody saying that. They're not a sponsor or anything, I hope, but like, we want to play relatively conservative, but you will take your shots in your GPPs. And if I do hit my cash game 65 to 70% of the time, those are going to lead to 4 or 5 weeks that I could really push the envelope on the GPP side of things. Mm-hmm. And I hope that helps. I love the questions. Scott, I'm actually going up to Wisconsin this weekend, so I'm excited for Labor Day. I hope that's where you're from, the Wisconsin Florida Project guy, whatever that means. But I like it. I love Wisconsin. But yeah, I hope that helps. If it's great to hear that type of feedback, because I think sometimes I can kind of spew maybe like too advanced nonsense, but especially like to a newbie, kind of slowly work your way in to a couple weeks, because we still like, we can consider ourselves experts or whatever. We don't know how these teams are going to play, how the workload and the volume is going to, we can project it, great. But if it doesn't happen, it's still football. It's still human beings, new coaching staffs. So it's like, don't go crazy in the beginning of the season. Start to rack up your bankroll with those cash games. And if you ever have like ownership questions too, like I know, Sia, you're excellent on Twitter, a great follow. You're very interactive with people. If you don't want to pay for a service that shows you ownership projections to see where that chalk is coming from in the market, just reach out to guys like us. We're happy to interact with anybody, because I'm never going to tell someone to pay $200 a month for a DFS website when your bankroll's only $100 a week. Like, okay, now you got to make up twice that much because you're paying for this service. So it should be fun, and I hope everybody listening has a great time this season.
That reminds me. So, because you put a lot of your content and exposure, I know you do it for PGA. I think you do it for like NFL when you do the MME stuff. But either way, you put out a lot of stuff on your Twitter. And correct me if I'm wrong. Your Twitter is at StixPicks, which is STIXPICKS, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep, absolutely.
All right, definitely give Nick a follow, because he puts a lot of content. Of course, he puts a lot of content out at Win Daily Sports behind the paywall, but a lot of his stuff is on Twitter as well. So definitely give him a follow there. This is actually a really good transition, because you talked about week 1 and the relative unknown, and you also talked about, hey, I might kick you off the show, or people might puke when they hear your plays. I think that's perfect, particularly for week 1 or week 2, because we think we know things that maybe we don't know. So we're actually going to get, and Jay Metz, thank you for saying that. He says, hit that like and or subscribe. Ladies and gents, thank you. Really appreciate that. Subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. Fantasy Football Today, DFS. That's what you type into Spotify or to Apple Podcasts, and just subscribe. And if you like the show, hit a 5-star review, say a couple of words. But this is a good transition point to just getting us into the week 1 slate. But before we do that, let's hear a quick message from our partners.
America's Service Academies kick off their seasons right here on CBS Sports Network.
All right, we cleared it up with the Wisconsin guy. Born in Wisconsin, retired in Florida. A very familiar story as someone who spent 17 years in Fort Lauderdale, Scott. Now back up in the D.C. area. All right, well, let's talk about week 1. So let me set the table here for everybody. Again, we're going to do on this show next Thursday at 11. It's going to be me, Mike McClure, and Meg Shop. We're going to do a very sort of structured but very quick hitting. It's going to be pretty rapid fire, which I think you'll like. Game by game preview in terms of our favorite plays, our favorite games, stacks, contrarian plays, you name it. Chalk fades and things of that nature. Here, I just want to more have a discussion, get into the mind of Stix. Now, there's a few games that I think people are going to target, right? We got the Jaguars and the Dolphins. These are high total games. The Texans and the Colts, high total game. The Cardinals and the Bills. I'm pretty fond of that one, a high total game. Let me ask you this. You've already built 118 lineups, hand built, which I love, because that means you are going through the process, as opposed to like putting in a player pool and letting the computer kind of do its thing. I kind of consider you a computer in your own right. So talk to me about, are any of those 3 games sort of a big part of, and we'll get into the players themselves in a second, a big part of your 118 builds so far? And or are there other games that are kind of off the radar that you're like, the total's wrong here, the implied total's wrong here?
Yeah, obviously Jacksonville, Miami is probably the most appealing, and it will be the most appealing for the DFS field. So that is where most of the ownership is going to go. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, then running it back with Miami guys on the other side. I think we'll see a lot of Tua. There's no ownership projections out there right now, but just looking at it, I think the most owned quarterbacks is going to be Josh Allen, Tua, and Kyler Murray on the other side of Josh Allen. I think Trevor Lawrence will probably be like right there in the middle. But in tournaments, we want to get different, especially if you're playing like a very large field, like you mentioned. I think another piece of advice that we didn't really touch on, especially if you're new, try to find single entry contests with a couple hundred people in there, right?
Yeah.
It is a lot easier to cash against a couple hundred people than playing against, companies that like have 30 different people running these computer algorithms and getting different variations, and they all join the same contest trying to hit the first prize and splitting it between their stuff. Like that stuff happens. It is kind of a strange industry now that it's getting so popular, but find those smaller contests, especially if you're new, unless you're, if your bankroll's like, hey, I'm trying to hit the moon on my GPPs, then go play the Millie Maker or something with 10,000 people in it, whatever, like float your boat, I guess. Just know what you're getting into going at that. Like, to me, one other piece of advice, I love single entry, but there are some weeks I have a hard time deciding like, all right, this guy's my GPP quarterback, no questions asked. Like, one thing that I hate is when a slate is over and I was like, I was on that guy, I got off him at the last minute. Maybe 3 entry contests is where to go, where you can only put 3 entries. It's like, hey, I have 3 quarterbacks that I really like this week, I can't decide which guy is number one. Go to a 3 entry contest, right? It'll be a lot easier on you mentally too. Like that, hey, if it all goes bad, it's like, all right, I was just off that week. It didn't go as planned. Great. But it's like, if I just did single entry and Kyler was my QB2 and he didn't make the player pool, or, Deshaun Watson or something like that, and it's like, it just didn't go my way. It's like, I was on those guys. I just didn't play lineups with them. That'd be my last piece of advice too, is kind of like know yourself mentally. So it's like, all right, I want to build so I know that if things go wrong, I could sleep at night. I just missed that week, instead of like, oh, I was on that guy, I just didn't plug a lineup with them, because then you're going to start to chase it in the weeks following. But some other games that I like, and this is gross, I'm sorry, but in tournaments, I try to play absolutely kind of crazy, but I do see like a path forward of success. I think 2 defenses that are pretty bad with decent offensive coordinators, if not really good offensive coordinators, I guess they're kind of the head coach too in the Carolina thing. I think Carolina can take a little bit of a step forward here. I think that Carolina-New Orleans game should have a lot of scoring. I don't think Carolina's going to be able to stop anybody on defense, and I don't think the New Orleans Saints defense is what people think it is from the years past. And one thing that I love is, like, last year, everybody was playing Adam Thielen. Everybody was attacking Alontae Taylor, the nickel corner there in New Orleans. No one's talking about Adam Thielen this year. I personally don't remember the last time I've ever said anything good or bad about Adam Thielen. He's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. But I trust Dave Canales. So, like, looking at these coaching schemes, looking at the opposition and the talent that they have, I do think that Carolina should be in a pretty pass-heavy script, and no one's going to play Adam Thielen. So I think one of my favorite stacks is going to be Bryce Young, Adam Thielen. I don't know if I'll add Chuba Hubbard to that. The reason I'm okay with Chuba is, like, anytime I play a running back, I kind of want to, like, tell a story. Do they get 15 touches? Like, is that almost a guarantee? There's no one behind Chuba right now with Jonathan Brooks out and Miles Sanders. As much as I loved him in the past, I think it's just done with him. So, like, Chuba's a guy that's probably not going to leave the field. We saw Dave Canales run that offense with Rachaad White last year. Wasn't super efficient, but the guy got a ton of touches, right? A lot of catches. And DraftKings, where I play most of my DFS, it's full point PPR. So I may, like, double stack Bryce Young with Chuba Hubbard and Adam Thielen, and probably run it back with either Chris Olave or an Alvin Kamara. I think Alvin Kamara is one of the top running back plays that I have for the price in week 1. And then that is where I want to go get my exposure to those higher total games. Like Tyreek Hill, probably going to be a lock for most players. I can't think of a reason why you wouldn't want to play him, especially against Jacksonville's secondary. Their front 7 is good. I think Raheem Mostert is someone that's going to be very interesting for week 1 on the contrarian side of things, because everybody is going to play the pass catchers in that game. Raheem Mostert's not dead, right? Like, everybody loves Adrian this year. His draft stock is just continuing to rise. Like, that is a guy that does not check the box for me of, can he get 15 touches? Sure, he could take one 85 yards to the boat at any time, but I don't think I want to bank on that. Like, if I'm doing this long term, I think fading guys like Achane in that game script is probably a plus EV thing, right? To where I do think a guy like Mostert can get 15 plus touches and the goal line carries he's going to be 5 to 8% owned in that game because everybody wants the pass catchers. So maybe that's somewhere to look. But what I'm going to do, and this is why my other quarterbacks I'll talk about real quick, Jaden Daniels, I do think that Washington-Tampa Bay game it's very similar script to Carolina, New Orleans. I don't think either of those defenses are very strong at all, especially with Carlton Davis leaving Tampa. I don't know what I think about Jaden Daniels. I know he could run a little bit. I don't want to put a lot of stock into the preseason, but you know where those targets are going. There's one guy I love on that Washington side. I want to get your thoughts as the home guy. But Diami Brown at 3K, is he going to be a lock, or is that a sneaky play? Like, he's almost in. If I built 118, I probably have him in 40 lineups, and I would never advise someone like taking that hard of a stand on a 3K player, but he's going to get 5 to 8 targets in that 3K. A guy that can catch a 45-yard touchdown at any time, like that is very useful to my lineup. So, real quick before I get your answer on Diami, but that is helping me get different by most likely locking Tyreek, but also pairing Justin Jefferson with him. I think that's kind of the way to get different in week 1 is to have 2 stud wide receivers in that 8K range. And really the only way to do that for me personally is getting guys like Bryce Young or Jaden Daniels, or honestly, even Geno Smith. I'm really interested to see how efficient that offense is. So that's kind of my 3 quarterbacks right now are those 3.
So I got some questions for you, and I got a couple of answers too. Well, I mean, they're not answers, but I do think it's Diami Brown by process of elimination. And at 3K, I mean, first of all, that was a game I was targeting when the afternoon slate comes out. There's 4 games. They all have like a very similar total and implied totals,
that low
for the
40s.
most part. Yeah, exactly. So that game was a game I was targeting where I wanted to play Jaden Daniels, maybe with McLaurin, maybe with Diami Brown as well, especially these shorter slates. I'm more prone to just like kind of overloading. And then maybe a Chris Godwin on the way back. Obviously, Mike Evans in play, Rashad White potentially in play. I like that. And I agree with you for salary relief. I don't know who else it could be. It's not going to be Luke McCaffrey. I mean, they just don't have weapons on the outside. It's really, and Diami Brown's he has some experience. He's been injured a little bit too. So I do think he's the next man up as far as the wide receiver too. And I'm sure we'll get clarification as we get closer to the slate, but I hadn't even thought of him because I haven't thought of the main slate as much as you, but I think that's a pretty good play. Let me ask you this about cheap quarterbacks, because I like where you're going with the stacking, the like expensive receivers. You mentioned Justin Jefferson though. Any thoughts to play Sam Darnold, or for that matter, to play Daniel Jones and stack him with like a Malik Neighbors, something like that?
I looked at it. I don't know how much I trust New York in general. I really worry about Daniel Jones. I just don't think he's going to be nearly as efficient as a guy like Bryce Young, which is weird to say because Daniel Jones has had massive games on the fantasy football side of things. Mm-hmm. But that's not a bad play at all. For me with man, I don't think I can get there with Sam Darnold. I think my first lineup that I posted like months ago, right when DraftKings posted a thing like Sam Darnold was a quarterback, I made a tweet like it's fun to win the Millie Maker in July or whatever it was, or June. I think I'm going to be off on Sam Darnold just because I do want, like, having a little bit of a running quarterback does help a lot. I know I mentioned Geno. Geno's probably not going to run much RPO at all with the new coordinator there, but I know Bryce Young is going to run a lot of RPO. We know a guy like Jaden Daniels can run for 70 yards at any time. Yeah. So I think, and Daniel Jones, I guess, does check that box. So if I did have to answer that, I think I would go with Daniel Jones, but I do really, really, really respect that Brian Flores defense in Minnesota. I think that they're going to be very, very strong. I think like they're a team that most of the public will look past just in terms of like winning games and against the spread. I think they'll give Chicago and Detroit and Green Bay a close game every single time they play. That division is just going to beat up on each other.
Yeah, I agree with you that Minnesota is probably a little under the radar. And I don't know that the idea that JJ McCarthy isn't playing this season, I don't know that lowers the stock for me from a season standpoint with Sam Darnold. Not that I'm a big Sam Darnold backer, but I think JJ McCarthy was likely going to need some time regardless. Okay, another question for you. And then we'll talk about other positions, other kind of sneaky players that you like. This is gross. So I presented this to Derek Brown, when he was on a few weeks back. Nobody likes Deshaun Watson. He hasn't played this entire preseason. He's going up against a Dallas defense that's losing some players and doesn't have a ton of depth. Like Deron Bland is out 6 to 8 weeks, and they've got Micah Parsons, but like I don't think this is necessarily as complete of a defense as other people think. Is it possible that this shoulder injury is finally fully recovered and his confidence is recovered and maybe he runs a little bit? Am I totally crazy? Let's say maybe it's just the afternoon slate I'm playing Deshaun, or maybe it's the main slate. Any thoughts on that one?
No, I love it. I've drafted Deshaun Watson as my QB2 in my home league. That's a 2-quarterback league. I'm worried about the shoulder, like everything on the radio. There's like nothing positive coming out about him. I know the whole contract restructure thing today is pretty wild. Like they do have the most cap space in the NFL next year. So that is going to be interesting. They're doing something funny in Cleveland. They have a lot of talent. Like you could stack them. And I'm sure going at this afternoon slate, especially like Jerome Ford is going to be a very popular click at 5,500. Sometimes just the easiest way to get different is see where all the chalk's going. Go to the other, like the exact opposite game script that could make that game still reach the total that Vegas projects, right? So Deshaun Watson, obviously, like right when pricing came out, when I saw 6K, it's like that is a really good value if he is back. I just don't know with confidence that he's back because you could stack him, you could mini stack with like Njoku. Obviously, Amari Cooper is going to be a very good player like he always is. I just don't know what to expect with Deshaun Watson. And the way that my key to success in my mind in week 1 is playing a Tyreek Hill and a Justin Jefferson together and going up just a little bit for Deshaun Watson. Didn't make that happen. But I do think that's a very sneaky play if he is good to go. So I'm definitely going to be like scouring Cleveland beat writers and the radio and everything like that just to see what we hear about his shoulder. But it does concern me that there's been nothing really positive, nothing terribly negative. I guess, he's got a sore arm after practice each day. That's kind of worries me. It feels like he's, rehabbing like a starting pitcher after like a 120 pitch outing, but like he's still relatively young and he's a couple of years from being a top 5 wide or quarterback in the fantasy industry. So absolutely, like that's a guy that can get it done with his legs too.
And I think it's that big if is why nobody's going to play him. Like if you have him in 10% of your lineups, you're way over the field, right?
So if you have him in 5%, you're going to be over the field.
Right. So it's kind of one of those things like you can still dabble there and potentially spike even if you don't have a large investment in him. If you have any questions, by the way, in the chat, send them our way. We'll DFS questions specifically. We will answer them. And we're just going to, Nick, we're going to touch on maybe some running backs that you like, some wide receivers, maybe in the value range, and maybe some tight ends before we get out of here. But first, one more quick message from our partners.
Football action continues. Are you ready for this? Ready to take chances? As the gridiron is taken over by the Great White North. It's time to storm the fortress. It's time to fight on the battlefield. Catch the Canadian Football League on CBS Sports Network.
We're back on Fantasy Football Today. DFS, it's our 11 o'clock show. We'll be hitting you with it every single Thursday at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. It'll be me. It'll be Mike McClure. It'll be Meg Schaap with our game-by-game previews and our cheat sheets. But for here now, it's Sticks Pick. Sticks, I love where this is all going. We got maybe about another 10 minutes or so. Let's talk about some running backs. You mentioned Alvin Kamara, who, for the record, I'm in the FFT Open. I'm one of the division managers for the Fantasy Football Today crew. Kamara was one of my draft picks. In fact, it's the second time I've drafted him now. We know Kendre Miller is out for some time. I don't know that Kendre was necessarily going to threaten, at least in a huge way. I don't know that he was going to threaten Kamara's touches in the first place. So my thought is people are kind of sleeping on Alvin Kamara. This is a guy you like week 1?
Absolutely. I think he's probably my favorite running back on the slate in terms of like price and expected value. He may arguably be my favorite running back on the slate in general. I don't think Carolina is going to be able to stop him at all, especially on the front 7 there. I don't know if I'm not going to pay for Jonathan Taylor. Like I said, my whole mindset, I doubt this changes. I do release like the 1st and 6th podcast on Wednesdays or Thursdays, right, leading up to each week. So maybe that changes if you want to check that out. That's obviously free on Spotify or whatever, but I don't think I'll get to anybody above Alvin Kamara. Like ETN, sure, you're getting exposure to the highest total game. That makes a lot of sense. I'm okay with that. Bijan Robinson, like the pure talent, absolutely, but I'll probably wait and see how that offense looks with Kirk Cousins coming back. And I don't really necessarily want to pick on Pittsburgh's defense. So for me, I think I'm starting my slate at the RB position with Alvin Kamara. I'm not really going to be in the Joe Mixon. I think Aaron Jones, if he's like under 5% owned, would probably be someone that I'll be interested in. But again, I'm kind of planting my flag on Tyreek and Justin Jefferson together. I talked about Mostert. I think it's a fantastic tournament play because everybody is going to play the pass catchers in that game. What are your thoughts on Rachaad White against Washington? I think he's going to be a forgotten man.
I agree. I actually brought him up a couple shows ago for week 1. I mean, I just think we know he's getting the volume, and I don't think who's the rookie? Is it Bucky something? I'm forgetting
Bucky Irving. Yeah,
there we go. I don't think he's going to be a huge threat week 1, and Washington's defense isn't very good. I think the pass catchers could have a bit of a day, but I think Rachaad White's going to get plenty of touches. I'm a fan of his. Again, that's one where. Yeah, I like to play the afternoon slate a lot. That's why I keep referencing it. But he's a guy I'll definitely have on the afternoon slate. On the main slate, I'm just curious because I like Kamara too. We see Rachaad White's at 6,300. There's so many seemingly like value options in the 5K range.
Yeah,
what would you say your favorite one is? Maybe 1 or 2 are in the 5K range.
It's tough. And I think that's where like the public's going to go to. So like you need to get different. I think overall, I think Zamir White will probably be the most popular. And I think in cash games, if he is going to be the most popular, I'll probably play it. I think that game is going to be at an absolute snail's pace. If anything, I think my favorite play in that game will be the Chargers defense because I don't think anybody will play them at all. Mm-hmm. I think the Raiders defense will probably be the highest owned. So I'll probably just go the opposite script there and pray for the best with the low ownership. But oh, man.
I mean, Jerome Ford is 5,500. I mean, do you think he's going to be chalky? It's Dallas defense at the end of the day. Okay.
I do think so, especially like when you go on DraftKings and you start to build your lineups, you'll see that green of obviously Dallas got destroyed on the run last year and Aaron Jones, what he did to him in the playoffs. That was embarrassing. I do think like a pivot to Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford's probably going to be in my cash game lineup. I just think it's a guy that will get 20 touches, a great offensive line. Obviously, we've talked about Kevin Stefanski on the show multiple times. Mm-hmm. So, like, I cannot say anything bad about Jerome Ford. Just keep an eye on the ownership. I don't think he's a lock. If he's at 20% ownership, I'll roll the dice with Javonte Williams. I think now that they cut P. Ryan, I don't think Jaleel McLaughlin will get a ton of run. He'll maybe be like a 3rd and a half down back, right? Like, so I do think Javonte has a path forward to 18 plus touches. I think the way to try to score on Seattle, and obviously with Bo Nix starting, like they're not going to want to get in a shootout with Seattle, especially with DK Metcalf and JSN, and if Tyler Lockett's healthy on the other side, that doesn't seem like a good idea. I love Kenneth Walker at 6,100, but that's not your question. So I think my answer is going to be, and I don't want to trust him after what he did to us last year, but Art Smith and Najee Harris. I think Najee Harris has a ton of run, a path forward to 15 plus touches, will be the goal line back for Pittsburgh. Atlanta's front 7 is not what it used to be. I think him and Javonte Williams on the GPP side of things, or potentially Chuba Hubbard. But I like Najee Harris a ton right now with Jaylen Warren being a little bit banged up. Mm-hmm. But I'm setting myself up for just to be like, what Art Smith did with Bijan last year. And it's like, you go right back to Najee Harris. Like that will be what keeps me up at night, Sunday night. Well,
I mean, the thing is Jaylen Warren thinks he's going to play week 1. It does seem like he's kind of rushing back a little bit. So that's one I think we need to get updates and see what it actually looks like heading into that slide. All right, let's transition real quick to, and by the way, you did mention Kenneth Walker. I think that's a great play as well. Let me look at the 6K range. You mentioned Aaron Jones. I think that's sneaky. I'm going to play Alvin Kamara. Oh, I know. James Cook, yes or no? 6,900.
I'm going to be out. Okay. I think their goal line back is still Josh Allen. I do think we're hearing a lot of great things about Ray Davis. I love James Cook. It's from like a PPR and honestly any format. I think this is a great, he handled the workload fantastic at the end of last year with Joe Brady. So I'm just not going to Alvin Kamara at 6,700. I have projected to outscore James Cook. I'm just going to trust my projections and go with Alvin Kamara.
I like it. And he's certainly going to be the lower owned guy, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, let's go to, by the way, before we get a receiver, what was the name of the podcast that is free on Spotify that you mentioned?
It is First and Stick. So the number 1 ST and STIX. It is, forewarning, it is like an hour of me ranting about the slate, but that's when I get into like more like coaching schemes, coverages, like who historically is going to do really well against like cover 3, all that good stuff on a game by game basis. And then we'll go through the player pool kind of like we are now, but it is 1 hour of me ranting. So I don't know if the new audience today hearing me can take that, but if you can,
I think they'll love that because I think they love this. And first, so you don't spell out the word, it's the number ST, like first, like
yes,
first place. Okay. Yep. And by the way, I've listened to that show last year. I absolutely love that show. And I'm actually glad you reminded me of it because that's extremely good content. All right, receivers. Let's just talk about, we don't need to go through all the receivers. Let's talk about maybe some high end and some low end like type value that you like on this slate.
Yeah. So Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson. I'm TBD on CeeDee Lamb. I think CeeDee Lamb's going to be like a 5% owned guy because everybody's going to be like, yeah, Denzel Ward, Cleveland, their secondary on the other side don't want to do it. I don't know if anybody is chalked into 15 plus targets more than CeeDee Lamb is. So if you want to get different and have the volume in the background, like CeeDee Lamb is probably a great play. In lineups that I'm playing Mostert where I won't have Tyreek Hill, that's kind of my rule is like, all right, I'm going Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb, but Justin Jefferson is going to be a lock play for me. I don't think there's anybody on the Giants that can contain him at all, even if you double him. It's more so like, yeah, we talked about Sam Darnold being a little bit sketchy, but he's still an NFL quarterback. And it's more so like I trust Kevin O'Connell to keep him in line. And Justin Jefferson is the other guy that I think is a lock for 15 targets in damn near any game script. So those three, obviously leaning Tyreek and Jefferson more. But if I am playing Mostert to get different in like a larger field tournament to where I will fade a 20% on Tyreek Hill, I'm going to go with a 5% CeeDee Lamb because, again, my thing is I want 2 star wide receivers in this lineup.
Real quick, any thoughts on if you fade Tyreek, just playing Waddle and hope you get the touchdown equity there?
Dude, is he healthy? I heard that he's struggling too, and that's a guy that like he leaves games all the time. At least in my mind, he does. I don't know if
it's like him and AJ Brown. They look like they're going to be out for the season, and then they pop back in.
Always, but no, I think that's an excellent pivot away. Like Jalen Waddle is a guy that offense in general, he should be 8+ targets, and he's 6,300. He's very affordable. I figured he'd open the season in the 7K range like Nico, but no, it's a great price.
I think like last I heard, and to be honest, I haven't looked at the news on Jalen Waddle in like the last 2 days, but last I heard, it wasn't really an injury of concern with respect to Tyreek's thumb or Jalen Waddle. I think it was a foot injury or a heel injury, something like that. But yeah, it's obviously something to monitor. But if he seems healthy, do you like that type of pivot?
Definitely. I think like a rule that I will have, whether I know it or not, but subconsciously, I will have a key contributor of the Miami Dolphins in every lineup that I build on the GPP side of things.
Before we get into some value options, your thoughts, because this is going to be a popular name because he's the flashy rookie right now. I mean, Malik Neighbors is as well, but Marvin Harrison Jr.
I don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
Historically, like Kyler Murray's wide receiver ones are fantasy gold. New coordinator now with Arizona and everything, but he's awesome. I mean, I said it to one of my buddies, is like he runs routes like Devontae. He's as tall as Randy Moss, and he's built like Steve Smith. So it's like, what is not to love about him? I would assume Buffalo can have their way with Arizona in that game, and it's going to make Kyler and company throw a lot. So, like, it makes a ton of sense to go Kyler or Trey McBride or Kyler and Marvin Harrison Jr. or going both and double stacking it, because that should be like a pushing 40 pass attempts offense for Arizona in week 1. So I just don't know what to expect with Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm expecting the best, but to pay that much, it's like that's kind of always, I look at it like the stock market a little bit. It's like, do I want to buy Marvin Harrison 7,200, probably close to a peak price, unless he's an absolute superstar, then he can go the AK range. When like Chris Olave is there at 6,600 or DK Metcalf at 62, like give me DK Metcalf with a college, 6,200 with a college pass happy offense. Like I want DK Metcalf more than anybody in the, like even over Devontae Adams. So like 76 and below, DK Metcalf's my guy.
All right, let's talk about maybe some 5K or even 4 or 3K options. A few that stick out to you that have fit inside already your 118 builds. And of course, that's ongoing, but that's what you got so far.
You mentioned him, Malik Neighbors. I think on the other side of Minnesota, assuming that they could score a lot, KOC, I love his offense. Again, Darnold may hold it down a little bit, but Malik Neighbors is priced like where we want to take a shot at a rookie, right? We may never see him at 5,900 again. He's extremely talented. Just to see, like, maybe that's my turnoff with Marvin Harrison, is just that he's almost 3K more than Malik Neighbors. And arguably, they're both in a great passing script. Calvin Ridley was intriguing to me, but after I watch Hard Knocks, man, like Jalen Johnson and that Bears, they're going to be mean. Like that is an old-time Chicago Bears, hard-hitting. Even Kyler Gordon's laying the wood on people. That guy's tiny. So I was interested in Will Levis and Calvin Ridley, and we'll talk about our touchdown punt that we have to run it back from last year with Donald Parham. But probably Terry McLaurin, 5,600. Cortland Sutton's the only game in town there, 5,600. I do think that they're going to take the air out of the ball, though, and Sean Payton knows how to do that well with the check down game. That's why I love Javonte Williams at 5,500 as a pivot over Jerome Ford. Christian Kirk is probably going to be everybody's favorite click in that range because of the game script and all that. I think that's a great cash game play. In tournaments, I think I will be a hard pass because I would rather go to Terry McLaurin for 5,600 for $100 more. Scrolling down a little bit, Adam Thielen, man, I do think that is a 1 to 3% owned play that's going to have 15 plus points. And if he gets in the box, he goes for 20 plus, and everybody's like, yeah, this guy was wide receiver 14 or 15 last year. Why didn't I think of it against Alontae Taylor that every DFS guy seems to want to pick on? And I don't think anybody will talk about Adam Thielen. I like Khalil Shakir. What's your thoughts on the Buffalo wide receivers with Coleman and Shakir? It's like DraftKings like, we don't know. You figure it out. 5K and 5,100. Like,
I'm out. I think I'm out, particularly in week 1. I mean, I like Khalil Shakir. I think Keon Coleman probably needs some time. I'm just curious about like the targets. I mean, I understand they're the only show in town, but I mean, I think it's really going to be spread thin. I think we're going to see maybe some wide receiver 3, 4s get some targets. Knox get some targets. Of course, Dalton Kincaid and James Cook getting targets. I don't know. I think in that range, there's other games that have like similar implied totals for teams that have receivers that I think you can count on. I mean, for example, isn't Deontay Johnson like 5,300? Like you mentioned Adam Thielen, but I mean, I do think Deontay Johnson, maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me, but Josh Palmer, for example, I think some of these guys I like better. I think their path is more clear cut, maybe even JSN.
Yeah, especially if Lockett's still banged up. If Lockett doesn't go, JSN's probably an absolute smash play at 4,900. With Lockett out there, I worry about the volume because it's just been kind of hit or miss with what we saw last year. But yeah, Deontay Johnson, I'm interested. I guess I have to be because I do believe in Bryce Young in this game script in week 1. I'd rather just go to Thielen and attack the inside of the New Orleans defense. But Deontay Johnson's an absolute stud too. We've seen it time and time again. If he's on the field, he is a weapon. Other than that, it's like I've been flipping the coin on Khalil Shakir and Keeman Coleman, and it's like I just can't figure it out. I think Shakir's probably a safer floor. Keon Coleman could be the guy that goes for like 80 and 2 scores and tears up a GPP, but I don't know, so I'm probably not going to invest in that on a massive slate where there's tons of options in this price range.
So before we get to the random punt touchdown score, which might be a tight end, because last year you nailed it on this show with Donald Parham, who recently got cut, which is very sad because back in the Chargers days, I always liked to bet him first touchdown and he would come through. But you mentioned De'Ami Brown in the punt range, flat 3K. Is there anybody in that like 3 to 4K range that is like the value's like too good? Not a free square, but the value's too good.
I think De'Ami Brown is the guy. Let's keep going through this. I'm sorry. Like I would love to play Roma Dunze, but there's just too many weapons there. Oh man. Is there anybody you like as I continue to scroll through this?
Not really, to be honest. I see Greg Dortch at 3,900. It's very speculative, coming like it could be Michael Wilson. I don't know, like in terms of a third option behind the two you mentioned in Harrison and Trey McBride. But no, I don't see a lot here as I scan at all.
I think it's De'Ami Brown for me, man.
Yeah. I get it. I think that's a very interesting play. Noah Brown is 3,200. He's now on Washington. Speaking of potential wide receiver 2s, but I don't know that he'll be ready in week 1 to command wide receiver 2 targets. It'll be interesting to track that because I think Noah Brown's a good receiver that should have made the Houston Texans team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uwe 2K is back in here. J-Rob, thanks for the comments. Okay, so Uwe 2K, maybe we'll close the show here. Who's the best bottom barrel tight end player? Is this where the random touchdown from the Donald Parham play comes from?
Yeah. All right. I'll give you that guy. We got to keep an eye on his health. It's been bugging me that he's missed the last week and a half. Josh Whyle for the Tennessee Titans.
Wow.
I think is a fantastic value. I think it's plus 850. What I got for him anytime touchdown. Wait for other books to open that up. That was just me kind of being an idiot and taking it and run. But I think we bet Donald Parham at plus 850 last year, week 1. So Josh Whyle is my guy, 6,700. I do think he's got like standalone value and season long later. Let's just see what this concussion goes like. It sounds like he's back at practice today as I scroll through Twitter here. But if there's one way to beat the Bears, I don't know if they're going to beat the Bears, but it's in the middle of the field with big body guys like Josh Whyle. He's 6'7" and is very, very, very mobile. So,
okay, so
Josh Whyle.
Just to be clear, Josh Whyle, who was 2,500 on DraftKings, is a potential long shot touchdown score at somewhere between plus 850 and plus 1,000.
Yeah, I don't even think he's a long shot to score a touchdown. I'll put him in like a middle shot. If I'm pricing it, I would open 6-1, and that's as high as I'd go. But I doubt you get much risk as a sports book on guys like Josh Wiley anytime touchdowns.
Are we looking at, and maybe you don't know the answer to this question, normally you do, are we looking at a lot of 2 tight end sets with him and Okonkwo on the field?
I do think so, yes. Okay. Or if with how that wide receiver is shaken up with DeAndre Hopkins out, I think we're going to have to see a lot of Tyler Boyd at 4,500 is probably not a terrible play, but I do think that Chiggy will probably go outside a little bit more, and Josh Wiley would be in line and in the slot in 4 wide receiver sets.
Are you actually
they don't have anybody else?
Are you actually also daring to play him in DFS, or is this really just a touchdown punt?
No, I probably have 20 lineups with him in there. But again, it's like, and that was one of the things I wanted to mention. It's like a 0 fat lineup. Like, I don't like to have 2 punt players to where it's like, it would not surprise me if they got 0 points. That'd be a piece of advice. Is like, kind of tell yourself a story, be like, can these guys both get 0? Then I do not want that lineup. So if it's just one and it was Josh Wiley at 2,500, that would, I'm okay with that, because like what it does, like if you go put Bryce Young and Adam Thielen and Alvin Kamara and put Josh Wiley in there, like you could afford the world. It's kind of fun. I don't know if that's a good recipe for success in week 1, but one other tight end I will plant my flag in with Luke Getsy going to Las Vegas. They will run a ton of 12 formation, and that is where he scripts plays in the red zone. Michael Mayer at 3,100, I think, is kind of a forgotten guy. I don't like that Brock Bowers is missing practice right now, because maybe that'll put more people on Michael Mayer, but Michael Mayer is probably my highest owned tight end right now, because again, I'm going very heavy on the paying up for wide receiver thing. What are your thoughts on Greg Dulcich? We got to be done with him eventually, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think we're done with Greg Dulcich. I mean, the thing is I like Bo Nix. Like, and we're talking PPR when we're talking DraftKings as opposed to FanDuel half PPR. Like, I could, and he's going to get the ball out fast. Actually, I'm gonna look right away at his completions prop. I haven't even looked to see if it's out, but I think we're going to see Bo Nix like just tally up the completions. So I don't hate it at a flat 3K. He wasn't in my consciousness at all, to be honest with you. But with Bo Nix at quarterback, a safe spot for a rookie quarterback, it does make sense.
Yeah, I'm telling myself that Seattle can score at will. So it's like someone on the other side needs to do something. I hope that's 7 catches in the check down game to Javonte Williams, because I'll probably have a lot of him. But yeah, Michael Mayer is my highest owned tight end in my player pool right now.
So let me ask you this before we close shop. If Tyler Lockett's out, you're playing a ton of JSN, correct?
Yes.
If Tyler Lockett is not out, are you still playing a lot of DK Metcalf at 6,200?
Yes, that'll be my only Seattle guy is Walker and Metcalf. I won't play Lockett. I won't play JSN at that point.
And how many of your 118 lineups so far are an actual stack of Geno and one of those pass catchers?
Probably 30.
Okay, so what's that, 25%?
Yeah, it's right now it's literally I may have a couple Josh Allen and Kyler just to like maybe cover myself, but the majority of my player pool on the GPP side of things right now is Bryce Young, Jaden, and Geno Smith.
So gross.
I know.
And it's so GPP. It's hey, listen, this is why you absolutely smash on some tournament slates, because you're doing things that a lot of other people are just afraid, clicks that people are afraid to make. So, you win big or you lose big. Go ahead.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Kyle Pitts at 4,600. Am I getting suckered in? Like, I do have that Bryce Young lineup, can't afford a guy like Kyle Pitts. I think that's as high as it goes. The reason I ask is, was it Zach Robinson's now calling the plays there, and he's the disciple of the McVay tree and Kevin O'Connell tree? Like, tight ends have always been, if you're not a tight end, then it's the slot, right? And Kyle Pitts does both. Is 4,600 the cheapest we'll see Kyle Pitts? Is kind of how I look at it, as like, this is buying the bottom of the barrel price for a guy like him with Kirk Cousins in tight end history too. So I'm interested in Kyle Pitts if I don't completely punt tight end, because I don't like having De'Ami Brown and Michael Mayer in the same lineup, right? That's kind of like they could both go for 2 to 4 points and my lineup's dead.
Yeah, I think in the 4K range, we talked about Hunter Henry. I know I talked about him with Debro as a potential option. I think Pitts in the 4K range probably has the best upside. And I totally get what you're saying in terms of, like, first of all, a lot of people are going to want to play Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid, which is totally understandable.
Absolutely.
So a lot of that money is going to go there. Obviously, I think Evan Ingram's very much in play at 5,500, but I think people are a little salty about Pitts. And they see speaking of Pitts, the Pittsburgh defense, I mean, they don't rank great from last year against the tight end position, but like this is still a very solid defense. And I think people are probably going to wait and figure out what happens with Kirk Cousins. Correct me if I'm wrong, even at 4,600, he's not going to have a ton of ownership. So I think he's very playable.
No, I think the guys that you mentioned, Kincaid, McBride, and Evan Ingram are going to be the 3 highest owned tight ends on the slate. Again, that's kind of why I'm getting different at the tight end position. Dude, it's Zach Robinson is really the reason I like it. Like, yes, Pittsburgh's defense is awesome. I think that he will scheme Kyle Pitts into mismatches against linebackers or small nickel cornerbacks. And if I think I say this every year, if there's any time for Kyle Pitts, it's now. Now that this is recorded and, out there in the ether, I need people to hold me accountable. If I play a lot of Kyle Pitts this week, if it's not coming in week 1, I need to call the 1-800 Kyle Pitts helpline because I need to stop.
Well, I've never been really a Kyle Pitts guy. Granted, I'm wrong about a lot of other different stuff, but I've never been on the Kyle Pitts train. But I do think this probably is the time to do it because of all the reasons that you said. And by the way, Red Hawk, you said, should I drop Jalen Wright for Samaje Perine? I would not do that. Any thoughts there, Sticks?
No, I mean, I love Jalen. I think just getting exposure to that Miami backfield is like, if you drafted Achane late or picked him up, like that was a huge win. If you drafted Mostert late last year, that was a huge win. That system it's awesome with McDaniel there. Like I want Jalen Wright. He looks awesome. Looking at his college tape, he looks awesome. I am a Samaje Perine truther. Back in the day, I wrote an article on him on Win Daily that one of my friends would not let me live down, and then he became a thing the last 2 years. Like I was just early. But no, keep the upside in Jalen Wright. I'm assuming none of those guys are cracking your like top 5 starters at the running back position.
Right.
They're just bench stashes. To take the upside in Jalen Wright.
100%, especially with the bench stashes. All right, Sticks, that'll do it, man. We went a little bit longer because I mean, getting into the mind of Sticks picks, I can't wait for that First and Sticks podcast because like this is the type of content I want to hear. It's the type of content, by the way, you're going to hear next Thursday and every Thursday from me and Mike McClure because he's going to come armed with his simulations, of course, and a lot of just the brilliant stuff he drops. And Meg Schaub has really just come onto the scene in the best ball streets, but also DFS. So she's going to be with us as well. I'm going to be playing more of a host role, honestly, and just like collecting their opinions. But I'll give out some of mine as well, of course. Sticks, speaking of opinions, before we get out of here, we know we can watch you on the First and Sticks podcast. Where else can we find you?
Every Sunday morning at Win Daily Sports on YouTube. It's a free live stream. We break down the slate, go over like injury news and everything like that. Hopefully week 1's pretty clean, but as the season goes on, that last minute, gives you about an hour leeway to change your lineups before lock. The live stream there going through the DFS player pool and season-long questions. So it's free. Definitely, if you're bored on Sunday mornings and don't have anything better to do, you can come listen to me ramble a little bit more with Ghost on the Win Daily Show. So other than that, articles will be on Win Daily. And again, I try to do as much as I can on Twitter, just giving out again, I'll never say like my advice is the best way to go. I'll always be clear on who I'm playing. So if you have any questions, things like that, like hold me accountable too, but reach out on Twitter anytime. I think like free advice is the best thing that we could do for this industry and people as a whole. Cause like without us, like the NFL wouldn't be what it is. I know it's still going to be a monster and continue, but fantasy football has been such a big addition to fantasy or to football as a whole. And it's awesome. So it's what I look forward to every single week.
Perfect way to close the show. It's what I look forward to as well. Thanks for being in here. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for coming in here on YouTube and hitting the like button. We'll see you next Thursday, which will be game day. That'll be the kickoff, the Chiefs, and of course the Baltimore Ravens. And then Friday, we've got the Packers and the Eagles. And then we got the Sunday slate. We're going to be talking about all of that next Thursday at 11 o'clock with me, Mike McClure, and Meg Schaub. For now, thanks for coming out, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show. This has been Fantasy Football Today, DFS. See you next week.